pleasure to introduce you Hannes Klepper. Hannes Klepper is the co-founder of Iversity. It's an open online course management platform. He holds dual masters in public administrations from Columbia University and the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. And he has been working very closely with Professor Yehuda Elkana. He couldn't be here today because he had a health problem. So, and we hope that he's better now. I think he's back in Israel. Mm-hmm. So we send him our best wishes. So I would like to welcome also all the people who are following us through streaming. I know that many people are there following us from South America, from South Africa. We are getting tweets from everywhere. So thank you very much for being with us. So Hannes, our subject today is higher education curricula, technology, and the changing role of the teacher in the 21st century. So as I said this morning, so I think we all here are convinced that we have to change the way how we teach, but not only that, we have to change also what we teach. And I think this morning we have seen from different perspectives that everyone agrees now, or almost everyone agrees now on that. So, Hannes, the floor is yours.
So first of all, I want to make clear that what we're talking about today is, I'm heavily indebted not only to Yehuda Elkana, but also to the discussions and deliberations and often intense debates that we had with a working group of scholars that met at the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin during the academic year 2009-2010. Participants in that group represented diverse disciplines from the natural and social sciences as well as the humanities. There were people from different geographic regions, specifically Europe, North America, and India, and different career stages from a former university president to students currently enrolled. It was both hard work and a great deal of fun, and the whole project being conducted in the spirit of what I'm going to talk about today. In the following, I shall be using the we form in acknowledgement of the fact that working out these ideas was a genuine team effort. As you may have read in the abstract, we shall argue that in the 21st century, the work of teachers should undergo two fundamental transformations. We have to rethink what it is that we're teaching as well as how we are teaching it. Let me reiterate why it is that our argument is primarily concerned with higher education. Why we think that undergraduate education at the university level is of crucial importance. While this might be stating the obvious, it is professors and teachers that are teaching future generations of students at all levels. So since both of these groups receive their professional education at universities, any reform that aims to have a transformative impact throughout the educational system, in our opinion, will have to start there. In other words, we believe that if higher education is redesigned along the lines we suggest, there will be a transformation throughout institutionalized education. We are aware of the fact that this conviction places great demands on an institution that already seems overburdened. Universities worldwide are experiencing hard times. This is hardly news. However, the difficulties that resulted from the underfunded move towards mass higher education that were recently exacerbated by the global financial crisis distract attention from a more fundamental problem: the university's own failure to innovate. This is what we regard to be the root cause of the university's troubles, a problem that requires urgent attention. Our basic contention is that at the beginning of the 21st century, the university as an institution has reached a dual impasse, an impasse that prevents it from fulfilling one of its core functions, namely to provide students with a worthwhile education. This impasse is rooted in the inadequacy of university curricula, as well as in their outdated mode of teaching. By addressing both of these problems, universities will not only be able to reinvent themselves as institutions, but will redefine what is meant to be a teacher in the 21st century. The root of this crisis is intellectual. It is a crisis of aims, focus, and content, which is rooted in confusion about all three. In retrospect, this situation is not surprising. It was inevitable that an institution founded on the 19th century concept of the divisibility of knowledge into independent disciplines would find itself in difficulties in the early 21st century, a time whose signature characteristic is that everything, subjects, people, systems, and not least problems, are connected. At the same time, the theories and tools that may help us better understand and teach students about this new world were unknown to the likes of Humboldt and Newman. The crisis has been brewing for some time, but is all the more apparent today as the speed of social, intellectual, and technological change outside the universities increasingly outpaces their capacity and willingness, and we talked about this earlier, to innovate. As a consequence, universities are increasingly unable to teach students how to think about the problems the world faces today, let alone about how to contribute to possible solutions. The world is complex and messy, and it has always been complex and messy. Yet the great idea of the Enlightenment in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries was to create knowledge in all areas as if this were not the case. As if the world were predictable, context-independent, coherent, linear, and as if in the end all knowledge were reducible to a few universal formulae. The cluster of values that were put on a pedestal of were the following: universalism, rationalism, objectivity, value-free knowledge, context independence, the existence of non-political knowledge, an abhorrence of contradictions, anti-dialectical thinking, and so on and so on. It's a long list. Moreover, the Enlightenment was committed to the belief that there is strict compatibility between the world of nature and the world of human society, the cosmos and the polis, called by some scholars the cosmopolis. As a result of this daring assumption, an unprecedented richness of knowledge was created in the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. Yet this Enlightenment program began to break down in the 20th century, where more and more new knowledge was created that made clear that the world is not linear, not coherent, not free from contradictions, not reducible to a few formulae, and context dependent. It became increasingly clear that the cherished universals of the Enlightenment were actually local Western universals. Thus, in our opinion, we need no less than what we'd like to call a new Enlightenment. This new Enlightenment should be based on the principle from local universalism to global contextualism. So again, from local universalism to global contextualism. This is the program. What we mean by that is that instead of spreading local theories that proclaim universal validity, and if you care for an example, think about the activities of the Bretton Woods institutions in developing countries, instead what we need is a global movement towards locally contextualized theorizing. We need to embrace contradictions, learn to live with incoherence, deal with nonlinearity, and question our own values. This movement must find its expression in higher education curricula, as the university is the only social institution established for the explicit purpose of creating genuinely new knowledge and passing it on to future generations. Let me describe the problem in some more detail. To say that universities are relatively slow in adapting to a changing world, as we have above, is not to ignore the fact that some serious attempts at reform have been made and are being made. Some universities are undergoing often radical and structural transformations, ranging from the Exzellenzinitiative in Germany to the Bologna process in Europe as a whole. There is certainly potential for creative change in these organizational transformations, but the accelerating decline of public investments in universities in Europe, the United States, and in countries in other regions, in the face of ever-growing demand for access everywhere, may annul much of this potential. On the other hand, countries like Brazil, India, and China are pouring billions of dollars worth of new funds into establishing new universities and opening their gates to millions of students. Yet the basic model that these countries are using is the Western model of the 20th century, the multiversity, the very structure that is beginning to fail in the West. Despite the signs of strain and incipient failure of this model, the responses of the governmental bodies responsible for tertiary education in the West to the intellectual questions raised by the state of the world are for the most part inadequate. While reforms abound, they are often designed to maintain the essential features of the status quo, and their real focus is on tapping new funding sources. They don't engage the intellectual questions thrown up by the state of the world. This emphasis on financing with its implicit acceptance of contemporary structures shapes the language that universities use in addressing the outside world. It permeates their argument to justify their existence and correspondingly mouths the responses they receive. you may have followed the debate about the Brown Report in Britain, and at this point I would like to use the opportunity to recommend two excellent recent pieces by Stefan Collini in the London Review of Books to you. Yeah, they do great jobs of taking apart this question of how language shapes the debate. Okay. The focus on funding diverts attention away from the much-needed discussion of the central issue of what universities are for, what they should be teaching today, how they should teach it, and what needs to be done to ensure that students leave university with an educational foundation that is adequate for the 21st century. The first crucial but essential topic that gets neglected in most discussions of university reform is the nature of university curricula. For each university, essentially a community of scholar teachers and students, the curricula embody its central raison d'etre and must therefore hold the key to its internal renewal. If our contention that a curricular structure based on the 19th century model of knowledge is inherently inadequate to the present time is correct, then curricular reform is in fact the essence of any university reform, and for that matter, of any reform in education in general. In short, we'd like to argue that the basic teaching model is flawed, failing to reflect the world's complexity. In a sense, this is not new since the world has always been complex, but the practical relevancy of that complexity in people's lives has increased significantly. The world is not only increasingly interconnected in multiple ways, as we have just noted, but simultaneously fractured along economic, political, social, and religious fault lines. By any number of measures, world civilization in the 21st century is on the brink of major environmental, economic, and social dislocations, some potentially catastrophic. Universities can either change to become effective instruments to help humanity avoid these situations, or struggle to maintain themselves as they are and thereby write themselves into irrelevance as the disaster unfolds. If our diagnosis is correct, then one central objective of universities should be to endow their students with the capacity to solve complex problems of all sorts and to help them acquire the mindset necessary to understand and tackle the challenges thrown up by the contemporary world. This cannot be achieved by the traditional curricular structure, which is founded on discipline-based departments whose lineage traces back to a time when the world was seen as stable, predictable, and orderly, and above all, divisible into neat compartments for study and understanding. Let us make this contention more concrete by taking three examples of major contemporary problems: global warming, rapidly spreading epidemics, and world poverty. All three of these problems neither lend themselves to traditional analytical approaches nor to conventional solutions. Should, for instance, global warming only be dealt with in meteorology classes, epidemics only in biology classes, and poverty only in social work classes? Just to pose the question in this way illustrates how preposterous as well as useless this suggestion would be. None of these problems can be comfortably fitted within any standard academic discipline. All have crucial environmental, biological, societal, political, mathematical, computational, and economic dimensions that collectively burst the boundaries of the standard subject areas. It follows that students need to learn how to think about these topics in all their multidimensional complexity. Today, because such phenomena do not lend themselves to treatment within the traditional frameworks, they're hardly dealt with at all and are primarily discussed as complicated special cases, only to be dealt with by the most advanced students and gray Nobel Prize-winning eminences. Inconveniently, the academic as well as the practical world throws up more and more problems of this very nature. Treating them as special cases is simply not a valid option anymore. Appropriate radical curriculum reform in universities will, amongst other features, allow such real-world problems to enter the classroom. In fact, we posit that curricular transformation of this kind should be the first preoccupation and the primary aim of overall university reform. If one does not get the curriculum right first, reforms that deal with other issues such as finance and organization can only achieve partial success at best. We recognize that while the problems of contemporary university curricula are global, there is no universal there's no universal model that will suit all national cultures. So, yeah.
I just want to say,
Mhm.
we are saying live,
Mhm.
which says I can't even follow because the reading is too fast.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was trying to sort of go more slowly, but yeah, I guess it's a matter of sort of being used to the text and. All right, I'll try to so slow down. Okay, where was I? We recognize. Okay, well. We recognize that while the problems of contemporary university curricula are global, there is no universal model that will suit all national cultures or all universities of any given nation. Indeed, students within a single university, as they pursue very different paths in terms of their professional and personal development, require different curricula. The various specific solutions that will evolve, both between and within universities, however, can and should be guided by a set of central principles that recognize 21st century realities of interconnectedness and complexity, of the world as well as our knowledge about it. It is the shape of these principles that we'd like to describe in some more detail. So, let us start with the question, what's the purpose of a university education? This question embodies two distinct issues. What should the individual student expect from a university education? And what should society expect from the provision of university education? The answer to the first ranges from self-fulfillment and personal growth to getting a good job, with the great majority of people probably emphasizing the latter. That utilitarian goal need not and should not preclude the former, however. Fostering curiosity about all phenomena, human, societal, and natural, should be a universal goal of higher education. Usually, this is reserved for a select few, the presumed top students. Yet, our extraordinary curiosity about the nature of things, and we heard about this morning, an indirect product of human evolution, is a fundamental distinguishing feature of our species, and universities everywhere should aim to spark it in all their students, not just the high achievers. Indeed, sparking such deep interest is essential for students to achieve any understanding of the main problems that 21st century societies are facing. Such understanding can only come from learning the fundamentals of the kind of thinking needed to cope with our astonishingly complex and messy world. This gift for critical thinking will be necessary if students are to become creative and effective problem solvers. However, critical thinking should not should be more than merely an analytic tool applied to externally determined ends. The study of questions of value will have to take center stage. Students have to be educated in a way that goes beyond training their capacity for rational judgment. A true education for critical thinking teaches them to challenge the very values on which their judgments are based. In the words of a former professor of mine, the German sociologist Klaus Offe, higher education should not only help people to answer the question, how do I get what I want, but should lead them toward becoming accustomed to ask the question, how do I come to want what I want? The standard answer to the second question I just posed, what should society expect from the provision of university education, i.e. what is it that society can expect in return for its investment in higher education, is an output of educated individuals who can earn their keep and contribute to civic life as well as the economic well-being of the common weal. While we broadly agree with this as a goal, we think that this way of phrasing the matter both seriously understates and misstates the issue. The business world increasingly realizes, and running a startup I can very much attest to that actually, that what it needs are fast learning and adaptive problem solvers, not made to measure specialists. So for example, on Monday, a girl with a master's in neurobiology started to work with us. So yeah, that certainly didn't prepare her for the kind of work she'll be doing at our startup, but it prepared her to become an adaptive problem solver. Companies today often operate on a global scale and therefore are acutely aware of the difficulties that Enlightenment fundamentalist curricula produce. Coincidentally, the kind of skills more and more companies are looking for happen to be precisely those societies would like their citizens to possess. What they're looking for are concerned citizens who can think creatively and work cooperatively on building and strengthening the communities of which they are a part. The pursuit of individual rationality may often be at odds with collective rationality, not just for society as a whole, but also for businesses. And I'm pretty sure that people at UBS in London can tell you something about that, if you've read about them losing 2 billion because of individual and collective rationality being at odds. Therefore, educators should not give up on trying to make their students realize that in the long run, individual self-interest and the collective good are complementary and serve to reinforce each other. No individual thrives in a dysfunctional or decaying society. Students need to learn that no man is an island. Having experienced some of the disastrous consequences that were created by policies ignorant of this fundamental truth, many more of today's students may well be receptive to this message. The important point here is that what the students need and want out of a university education and what society needs and wants from the academic world are largely identical. So business should be a partner in what we're trying to achieve. The affirmation that students should think critically about the information they are provided with is a truism. No educator would argue against it. Why should we mention it anyway? The reason is that it is a truism that is honored more in the breach than in actual practice, particularly because of the frequent conflation of information and knowledge. Typical university classes try to stuff the student's head with information while calling it knowledge. Yet the two things are truly different. While information is a set of unprocessed facts, knowledge involves the assessment and organization of information. The university's role of dispensing information, think of the standard lecture, such as the one I'm giving right now, is becoming obsolete as the world of computer networked provided information takes over. We'll have more to say about this later. More than ever, we are overwhelmed by information that often is disorganized and undigested. Therefore, students need to be enabled to A, process a glut of information in order to winnow out the true from the false and the important from the insignificant, and B, critically evaluate existing knowledge, namely information that has previously passed this winning stage and is widely accepted. It must be stressed that the university's role as a shaper of young people's ability to think critically is essential. There's no other institution in society that can take its place in this respect. This concept of knowledge as critically evaluated information, the development of creative, analytical thinking and evaluation capacities will also require productive forms of doubt based on an awareness of the limits of knowledge. In effect, critical evaluation requires learning how to recognize what is not understood, whatever the prevailing consensus might be. Students need to learn how to stand back from what they have learned and appreciate both the social and cultural context within which their understanding has been gained. Moreover, they should gain an idea of the broad intellectual context within which the ideas they have been taught were and are framed. In other words, they need to be not just critical thinkers within the frameworks of their chosen subject areas, but must learn to be the critics of those frameworks as well. This is true in the sciences, the social sciences, as well as the humanities. What were the questions that led to the framing of a dominant paradigm? How well do those foundations and subsequent findings really support it? Do we tend to accept a paradigm principally because of the intellectual inertia that prevails, or convenience, rather than because it remains compelling? How can paradigms be adapted and reinterpreted, or indeed sometimes be rejected in the light of new evidence? These are questions we should seek to stimulate. Thus, though it may seem paradoxical, the acquisition of knowledge and understanding requires the capacity to continuously re-examine the ideas that one is most certain of. In grappling with the most difficult questions affecting human societies, it is often this very ability, the capacity to re-examine fundamental assumptions, that makes the crucial difference between the ideas that are sterile and those that are fruitful. In effect, knowing how to know involves developing a sense of when we really do not know or understand something. This will put an end to the inculcation of the premise that underlies the traditional approach, the idea that all questions have certain answers. As we argue below, it is in appreciating the limits, ambiguities, and uncertainties of both questions and of proposed solutions to problems that in which real wisdom lies. While this fundamental shift will demand a lot of effort and experimentation, we believe it can be done. We maintain that it should be a fundamental aim for all university education, not just the programs at the very best institutions or those for the very best students. If this is what we consider to be the right approach, than it is what should guide curricular design in general. It is not just a question of basic fairness, which it is, but also of a prudent use of resources to maximize both the benefits of higher education as well as the number of those to whom these benefits are afforded. In summary, successful reform and implementation of curricula will help to feed students' curiosity, will let them grow personally, will allow them to realize their potential, and will inspire them to become constructive participants in society. These goals of higher education should take center stage and replace the present emphasis on training for the workforce or transmitting information, an issue about which we'll have more to say later. So what is it then that students do need to learn? Let us take a look at the actual bodies of knowledge that students must acquire, for we do not believe that higher education is only about the acquisition of skills. In our opinion, comprehensive higher education is as much about building a skill set as it is about building a mindset. Therefore, we believe that there are three essential broad areas with which all students, and we stress all, need to become familiar. Knowledge of the natural world, knowledge of the social worlds and human cultures, and knowledge of the individual on an emotional, cognitive, and behavioral level. Most universities provide instruction in these areas within the framework of the traditional academic disciplines. Thus, knowledge of the natural sciences is conveyed through courses in physics, chemistry, biology, and that of the social sciences through courses in history, sociology, political science, anthropology, economics, cultural studies. And knowledge of the world of the individual is conveyed in courses of philosophy, languages, psychology, literature, visual arts, and so on and so on. Of course, these distinctions are not neat, and there are courses that overlap, often by design, within and between the three major divisions noted above. But the traditional departmental framework remains the norm. This tripartite grouping of disciplines into major divisions, however, must itself be called into question if the division of knowledge in traditional academic disciplines is no longer tenable. Here, however, we'd like to make what is perhaps our seemingly most paradoxical statement. While the disciplinary framework is increasingly inadequate as an exclusive approach to understanding, it remains essential for the first steps of education and thinking. Disciplines we maintain are the necessary foundations for any form of education that combines both depth and breadth. They provide both an initial framework for thinking about a subject and the first exposure to how to think rigorously about it. Past experiments that tried to abandon disciplines altogether and that made all education problem-centered typically failed, often strikingly so. They resulted in superficiality and actually hindered further creative intellectual development. How then might one square the circle of providing entry to understanding via disciplines while avoiding their inherent traps? Some crucial implications follow from all of these considerations, and the most basic is that individual courses should highlight the challenges, open questions, and uncertainties of each discipline. An essential element of such an approach will be to bring into each course the much larger context in which the particular subject developed. Part of this will require treating knowledge as a matter of historical gestation and transformation. This requires us to critically examine how knowledge is being generated, acquired, and used. The history of ideas, then, is often regarded as a luxury, in reality is the very basis for understanding the dominant theories and their limitations. When knowledge is taught in terms of its contextual origins, that is, as a product of a particular cultural and social milieu, with all the connections and problematic aspects that such a context entails, students will acquire the capacity to appreciate, relate to, mediate, and translate between different points of view. This is an essential capability if they are to become creative thinkers and/or shapers of their societies. The above desiderata bring us to the most important change that university education has to undergo. As already mentioned above, disciplines were introduced and developed within the 19th century Eurocentric view of the world as a certain, orderly, stable, and predictable place. In consequence, traditional natural and social sciences, which are still taught at university, describe it as a highly deterministic world, one in which events can be fairly readily explained and predicted. Consequently, the physics taught today at the undergraduate level is predominantly a physics of equilibrium processes. And comparably, introductory economic courses start with the premise that the market economy always tends towards equilibrium. And who wasn't asleep for the last 2 years is well aware of the fact that they are not. One way of putting it is that the way we teach natural and social sciences is dominated by linear thinking. One of many possible definitions of linear thinking is that it is wedded to proportionality and predictability. Of course, most of the natural and social scientists who teach undergraduate courses built on these premises fully realize that the actual world is far more complex and often bears little resemblance to to what is predicted by the linear models. To give you an example, if you blow into a balloon, you do the same thing, you blow, and it increases in size, and at some point it bursts. It's a non-linear process. You know, you continue to do the same thing, but something completely different happens. This is what the world is like, not so much that, you know, the kind of theories we teach to undergraduates. The existence of phenomena often described as chaotic or fractal, non-equilibrium processes that that exhibit processes of self-organization, where networks theories apply, and the likes, they need to be acknowledged early on. Furthermore, a large part of any description of the world requires a broadly inclusive evolutionary perspective, but I think I'll skip this because it'll take too long to explain. This brings us to our central recommendation. We propose that undergraduate courses that provide rigorous training in the disciplines should be taught in parallel with new experimental seminars that cover real-life situations. Phenomena and problems that are necessarily complex and messy, ill-defined and interdisciplinary in character. So just to make sure that, you know, this isn't lost on you for all the pros. So the idea is, in parallel to disciplinary education, people have seminars that they attend where students come together from all disciplines to discuss questions such as poverty, the environment, climate change, contagious disease, global inequities, energy, natural resources, and the like. So clearly these parallel courses, these seminars at the freshman and junior level, they cannot be technically high level and rigorous, but they would assure that all students would gain a sophisticated awareness of the great problems that humanities is facing, and the fact that their own discipline alone cannot solve any of the great challenges. In so doing, we can introduce students to the very mode of thinking that we see as the crucial educational outcome of higher education, and a requirement for them to become concerned citizens. Instead of the models of either the multiversity or the liberal arts college, we propose that in the context of a 4-year bachelor's degree, students are granted the freedom to explore and experiment in the first year of education. The following 2 years should provide them with a firm grounding in at least 2 disciplines in conjunction with the above-mentioned seminars, discussing real-life situations, and during the last year of undergraduate education, the course should be broadened to make cross-disciplinary connections with increasing frequency and depth. Engaging students to approach problems in the way sketched out above promises to be one of the most difficult and at the same time most rewarding aspects of this approach. Teaching a set of seminars devoted to complex real-life problems that transcend disciplinary boundaries in parallel with introductory courses in the basic disciplines will help to demonstrate the value of interdisciplinarity. Students will get to know interdisciplinarity as a productive form of conducting research or engaging problems, not just an escape into dilettantism. Okay, then let me skip to this closing part because I think we've already exceeded the time. So higher education is not and probably never has been about filling students' heads with facts. The transfer of information has become obsolete. We've heard about this before. And the arrival of the Mars University coincided with the heyday of positivism and the belief that the principles of the scientific method were valid at all times in all disciplines, examining no matter which problems one was looking at. And This led to an understanding amongst academics that the world is discrete, measurable, that it is digital in a certain sense. Such a reductionist and digital understanding of knowledge, with its neat divisions of the world into categories of right and wrong, was delivered by an analog mode of teaching that was prevalent at the time. So today we begin to realize that teaching digital, supposedly universal knowledge by analog means is neither effective nor efficient. So that what comes next? In our opinion, the kind of curricula we just described can be described as analog. They are not right or wrong, black or white. And we have been talking about digital forms of teaching, new forms of teaching using digital technology. So what we suggest now is that we move from teaching digital curricula by analog means that are inefficient and ineffective to teaching analog curricula by digital means. And I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much.